Internet horror or online horror is hard to define. The internet is, after all, just the tool we utilize to find said horror and experience it. Some people define internet horror as horror content that is found on the internet, but I think that's an inherently wrong definition. You wouldn't say that The Shining or A Nightmare on Elm Street can be categorized as internet horror, and yet they can be found on the internet. Granted, they didn't originate from it to begin with, so I assume that the first requirement for internet horror is that it must have originated from the internet. But what truly counts as having originated from the internet? I'll give you an example. What about Five Nights at Freddy's? I often see FNAF being spoken about in various internet horror discussions, and yet, is FNAF internet horror? Isn't the FNAF series just a series of video games? It did originate on the internet after all, but does that mean that every indie video game that was uploaded on the internet exclusively rather than having physical copies for sale counts as internet horror? Well, obviously not. So what can we define as internet horror? I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all definition, as internet horror could be used to define creepypastas, analog horror, ARGs, and a variety of other categories of horror. One particularly interesting type of horror found on the internet though, it's the horror that does not originate from a singular person in particular, rather is the final result of the collaboration of many like-minded individuals creating entire communities around a singular concept. And the main subject of this video is going to be two of such concepts, namely the SCP Foundation and the Backrooms. So, before getting further into the video, I would like to shortly present what this video is actually about. I think this is going to be a pretty long video, and I'm not here to waste your time. You might have clicked on this with different expectations than what I'm going to talk about, and for the sake of clarity, I will shortly recap the subjects that I'm going to explore, so you can decide whether it's going to be worth your time to further watch this or click off. This video is going to be mainly a dedicated analysis of the SCP Foundation and the Backrooms, two heavily popular and widespread communities and fandoms that are responsible for the creation of a unique universe each, born out of what could be called a community effort. I will give an explanation to each of these, talk about what inspired these two universes and where they originated from to begin with and what did they further inspire afterwards, making a comparison of the two in the end, analyzing what do they have in common and sets them apart from each other, along with highlighting positive and negative aspects of these communities. On top of that, during the analysis of each, acting as a sort of transition between chapters or topics, I will be reading various articles, both SCPs and Backrooms levels. This should allow you to get a sense of the narrative style of each of these and better differentiate the two. If you are here solely for the analysis, timestamps will be included for you to skip over those parts. I will also try my best to avoid any loud noises, so if you are the kind of person who loves falling asleep to long format YouTube videos, this one might just do the trick for you. With this being said, I sincerely hope you are going to like this video. I've been wanting to talk about these two topics in a long format video for a while, and I think that combining the two for a comparison and analysis video was perhaps the best chance to do so. Now sit back, put up whatever game you're going to be playing while watching this in the background, or make your pillow extra comfortable as you prepare to drift off, relax and enjoy. The SCP Foundation, with SCP being an acronym for Secure, Contain, Protect, is a secret foundation responsible for capturing, studying, and maintaining under strict supervision anything that could be considered anomalous and unexplainable by normal means of science. Ranging from statues that won't move unless you blink, capable of snapping your neck instantly, to world-ending gargantuan gods chained in alternate dimensions, to something as simple as a regular Joe with a fish head, the SCP Foundation has it all. The SCP Foundation's horror narratives do not generally stick to one singular genre of horror, rather they include a multitude of them. Supernatural horror, psychological horror, body horror, eldritch horror, monster horror. If the genre exists, it is likely the SCP Foundation approached it in one way or another. It is safe to say that in probably 99.99% of these cases, SCP Foundation stories are displayed through a written medium. There are a few exceptions to this which I will present later, but for now it is important to keep in mind that written articles are the SCP's Foundation main media of storytelling. These articles, unlike the vast majority of horror stories, are presented under the form of scientific reports. The way it works is that the Foundation finds something that is anomalous, captures or acquires it, studies it, and then compiles a report about it, assigning each anomaly an individual number for identification, such as SCP-173, the sculpture, or SCP-109, the infinite canteen. These scientific reports involve certain rules and limitations to which the vast majority of SCP entries must adhere in order to be considered acceptable. The reason I'm saying considered acceptable is because while each entry is essentially considered canonic to the SCP universe, they're all written by different people. In fact, anyone can write an SCP entry, but each entry must first pass a certain type of quality assurance, through which the community's opinions and votes in the site's forums will determine whether that entry becomes officially part of the Foundation or not. I will now give an example of an SCP article and the format it usually follows, using SCP-002 as an example. An entry begins always with two pieces of information: the entry's number, in this case 002, and the object's class, in this case Euclid. While there are a variety of object classes, the three most popular and widespread ones are Safe, Euclid, and Catter. Object classes essentially represent the anomaly's containment difficulty level. A common misconception is that an object class is also an indication of how dangerous or deadly an anomaly can be, something that couldn't be more wrong. Safe anomalies can be just as deadly as Catter anomalies if handled incorrectly. These three are the primary containment object classes, with a few additional secondary and non-standard object classes existing, such as Thaumiel, representing anomalies used to contain other anomalies, Apollyon, representing anomalies that cannot be contained reliably and are expected to breach their containment imminently, Archon, representing anomalies that could be theoretically contained but are better left uncontained, Ticonderoga, representing anomalies that cannot be contained but also do not require to be contained, Explained, representing objects that have been fully studied, researched, and whose effects can be fully explained by the means of mainstream science, Neutralized, representing formerly anomalous objects that have been intentionally or accidentally destroyed or disabled, Decommissioned, representing anomalies that have been neutralized by the Foundation itself, Pending, representing anomalies that have not yet been assigned an object class, and Uncontained, representing anomalies that, well, have not been contained but require an active effort to do so. I won't give you an example for each of those, rather I will simply refer to the locked box test, an informal guideline by the SCP Foundation used to determine an object's most appropriate object class following this theoretical test. If you lock it in a box, leave it alone and nothing bad will happen, then it's probably safe. If you lock it in a box, leave it alone and you're not entirely sure what will happen, then it's probably Euclid. If you lock it in a box, leave it alone and it easily escapes, then it's probably Catter. If it is the box, then it's probably Thaumiel. If it used to need the box but no longer does, it's Neutralized. If this is because of a deliberate decision by the Foundation, it was probably Decommissioned. If it turns out it never needed a box in the first place, it's probably Explained. If you can't fit it in a box and it's about to end the world, then it's probably Apollyon. If you could have locked it in a box but chose not to, then it's probably Archon. If you can't fit it in a box, but that's not a big deal, then it's probably Ticonderoga. If you're not sure what box to put it in yet, it's probably Pending. Hopefully, you should be able now to comfortably understand what each object class means and roughly what to expect when being informed of it. The next piece of information that you will receive upon reading an SCP entry are the object's special containment procedures, which could also be shortened to SCP. These special containment procedures are exactly what they sound like. They are essentially the procedures that one must follow in order to maintain an anomaly properly contained, following afterwards the description, which will simply describe the anomaly. What does it look like, what are its capabilities, and perhaps a small list of preliminary tests or studies and ways that the anomaly responded to them. Articles will sometimes also have images of the anomaly in question to grant a higher degree of immersion. Finally, at the end of the article, you might find additional information or narratives related to it under the form of addendums, test results, interviews with victims of the anomaly or the anomaly itself, and reports made by the researchers tasked with studying it. These elements put together represent an SCP article, and a common theme that you will find throughout these articles is that they quite never deliver the full story, allowing the reader to come up with personal theories or conjectures about the anomaly in order to paint a full picture. The way this information is kept a mystery is through censor bars, referred to as redacted, representing information that you, the reader, do not have security clearance to access. An example of that could be the location of where anomaly is contained, the name of the researcher studying the anomaly, or the code to access its containment door. The second way through which information is kept a mystery to the reader is throughout the data expunged brackets, representing information that has been purged from the SCP database in its entirety and is now unavailable for everyone, no matter the clearance level, usually used for information unnecessary to the entity's containment or study, or information that should under no circumstance be read by anybody. In itself, using both the redacted and the data expunged censors is an art. If done properly, they can greatly enhance the quality of a story being read, by purposefully creating an area of mystery and allowing the reader to ask all the correct questions, but it is also important to know where and when to use them. Taking the redacted bars, for example, you might have an anomaly whose containment procedures require for you to not approach it and always remain at least redacted meters from it. This is an example of an incorrect use of the redacted bars, because the main purpose of an SCP entry is to give as detailed and accurate information as possible in order to contain the anomaly, but now we are left wondering whether we have to stay 10 meters or 99 meters away from it at all times, making the containment procedure for this anomaly extremely ambiguous. On the other hand, you could have the entry detail that you must remain at all times 60 meters away from the anomaly, or for each hour spent next to it, the person will age redacted years, followed by an entry detailing the anomaly breaching containment and spending 2 hours undetected inside a public school before being recaptured, with the details of the containment's breach aftermath becoming expunged data. This now creates an intriguing and possibly disturbing narrative. Do you age 10 years or 99 years an hour when standing 60 meters within the anomaly? And since the anomaly stood within a school undetected for 2 hours, how much did the people inside age? 20 years? 30 years? 40 years? 100 years? And why is the data of the aftermath expunged? What did the Foundation do to cover up this from the public and maintain secrecy? What about the victims? Were their memories wiped and assigned new lives, or simply disposed of? Or perhaps there was nothing left to dispose of in the first place? These are all questions that the reader can ask themselves after they finish reading an entry, while still not compromising the entry's utility for containment. After all, what does it matter how many years the anomaly ages you? You're not supposed to stand within its vicinity for more than 1 hour anyway. Of course, if you had a higher security clearance, you'd know the exact number of years of the aging effect, and you could deduct the fate of the students in the school based on that. Is that perhaps the reason why the Foundation decided to redact that information to begin with? Item number SCP-002. Object Class Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-002 is to remain connected to a suitable power supply at all times, to keep it in what appears to be a recharging mode. In case of electrical outage, the emergency barrier between the object and the facility is to be closed and the immediate area evacuated. Once facility power is re-established, alternating bursts of X-ray and ultraviolet light must strobe the area until SCP-002 is re-affixed to the power supply and returned to recharging mode. Containment area is to be kept at a negative air pressure at all times. Teams including a minimum of 2 members are required within 20 meters of SCP-002 or its containment area. Personnel should maintain physical contact with one another at all times to confirm there is another person present, as perception may be dulled, skewed, or influenced by proximity to the object. No personnel below level 3 are permitted within SCP-002. This requirement may be waived via written authorization from 2 off-site level 4 administrators. Command staff issued such a waiver must be escorted by at least 5 level 3 security personnel for the duration of their contact and must temporarily surrender their rank and security clearance. Following contact, command staff will be escorted at least 5 kilometers from SCP-002 to undergo a 72-hour quarantine and a psychological evaluation. If deemed fit for return to duty by psych staff, rank and security clearance may be restored when quarantine expires. Description: SCP-002 resembles a tumorous, fleshy growth with a volume of roughly 60 cubic meters or 2,000 cubic feet. An iron valve hatch on one side leads to its interior, which appears to be a standard low-rent apartment of modest size. One wall of the room possesses a single window, though no such opening is visible from the exterior. The room contains furniture which, upon close examination, appears to be sculpted bone, woven hair, and various other biological substances produced by the human body. All matter tested thus far show independent or fragmented DNA sequences for each object in the room. Refer to the Mulhausen report for details related to objects discovery. Reference: to date, subject has been responsible for the disappearances of 7 personnel. It has also in its time at the facility further furnished itself with 2 lamps, a throw rug, a television, a radio, a beanbag chair, 3 books in an unknown language, 4 children's toys, and a small potted plant. Tests with a variety of lab animals, including higher primates, have failed to provoke a response in SCP-002. Cadavers as well fail to produce any effects. Whatever process the subject uses to convert organic matter into furnishings is apparently only facilitated by the introduction of living humans. View Mulhausen report. The following is a brief report detailing the discovery of SCP-002. Subject was discovered in a small crater in northern Portugal, where it struck the Earth from orbit. Encased in a shell of thick rock, the fleshy exterior of the object was exposed by the impact. A native farmer happened upon the site and reported his findings to the village elder. Subject gained SCP attention when a level 4 agent posted in the area detected a small radioactive anomaly generated by the object. A collection squad of SCP security personnel, led by General Mulhausen, was immediately dispatched to the area, where they quickly secured the subject in a large container and performed initial testing with subjects recruited from the nearby village. 3 men individually sent into the structure subsequently disappeared. Upon discovering this deadly property of the subject, General Mulhausen issued a Level 4A termination order of any witnesses, roughly 1/3 of the village, to ensure no outside knowledge of the object, and initiated its transport to SCP facility, data expunged. During preparation for transport, 4 SCP security personnel were inexplicably drawn inside the object, where they too immediately disappeared. Following inspection, it appeared as if the object had grown several new furnishings and was beginning to look like the interior of an apartment room. General Mulhausen immediately ordered the requisition of several Class 3 hazmat suits for the remaining security team members, who proceeded to lift the container onto a waiting freight ship for transport to the SCP containment facility. Data expunged. Data expunged. Following the termination of General Mulhausen, SCP-002 was re-secured by SCP staff and brought into special containment in Classified, where it currently resides. Staff with clearance below Level 3 have been denied access to the SCP-002 container without prior approval of at least 2 Level 4 staff after the Mulhausen incident. I think that the article I just read is essentially a good example of what an SCP article should be, or at the very least was, because nowadays articles seem to get more and more complicated and convoluted in an attempt to further compete with other articles, but more on that later. SCP-002, or The Living Room, while being rather short, is a good example of a good article because it hits a lot of correct points in its writing. Starting with the anomaly itself, a giant tumor-like ball of possibly extraterrestrial origin due to being found within a crater that contains a small living room within itself, trapping people walking inside only to reopen itself later on to reveal new furnishings in the room, obviously made of the people that got trapped within. This is all the information that we are given regarding this anomaly, and it's perfect. We know what it is, we know what it does, but there is enough mystery around it to beg for other questions, such as why does it do that? How does it do it? Are the people transformed into furniture merely killed and reshaped, or do they become part of this sphere's biomass, remaining somehow still alive? What happened during SCP-002's recovery? Why were the records around General Mulhausen's transport of SCP-002 to the Foundation expunged? Why was General Mulhausen terminated? The word resecured is mentioned, indicating that at some point between the events of SCP-002 being loaded into the freight ship transporting it to the Foundation and arriving at the Foundation, the entity had somehow managed to either escape containment or cause some kind of problem, perhaps with the help of General Mulhausen itself, as he could have been affected by the psychic influences of this anomaly, explaining why termination was required. I think this area of mystery is what makes many SCP entities great, and how despite the entire theme around every entry, despite this general idea of having these anomalies captured, studied and documented in a scientific and clinical way, we are still left with many unanswered questions, leaving a lot of room for imagination. Another great example of a certain piece of information within an SCP article being rendered unavailable and causing the article in question to become tens of times more interesting is probably SCP-447. Briefly described, SCP-447 is a green sphere approximately 5 cm in diameter with a weight of around 1 kg. This sphere constantly produces a green slime that has a multitude of uses. It can be eaten, used to brush your teeth, combined with gasoline to improve engine efficiency, and even used as eye drops to improve someone's sight. It is essentially a miracle slime, with just one downside. Under no circumstance is the slime allowed to make contact with a dead body. Because of this, the Foundation barely makes use of the properties of this miracle slime, as any chance of it coming into contact with a dead body wouldn't be worth the risk, with entire paragraphs dedicated around the idea of just how many things would in theory be achieved and yet aren't, just to avoid the risk of the slime coming into contact with a dead body, with a researcher being demoted to D class by an O5 just for merely suggesting to attempt experimenting this slime with a dead body. I'm pretty sure the question arises. So, what happens when the slime does come in contact with a dead body? Well, that's the entire mystery surrounding SCP-447. We do not know. Any and all information related to the effects of 447 coming into contact with a dead body was completely expunged from the SCP's database, with personnel even attempting to delve further into the matter being threatened with instant termination or demotion to D class. While a common theory surrounding this slime is that it will bring the dead body back to life, causing what would essentially be a zombie virus, I heavily doubt for that to be the case, as if it were something so simple, the Foundation would likely have no problem in dealing with a few zombies given their resources, and the information wouldn't be this safely guarded to begin with. Whatever it is, it must be something truly terrible to warrant the execution of anyone even attempting to discover this information. I think that automatically makes SCP-447 far more interesting, given that a report of SCP-447's effects with dead bodies does exist, but it looks like this. Well, at least we know that it involves an entity wearing a trench coat and possibly an anomalous walrus. Now, if you jumped into this having little or limited knowledge around the SCP Foundation, first of all, kudos to you for even giving a chance to a possibly hour-long video about a subject you know little to nothing about. I suppose the title or the thumbnail were actually enticing, but more importantly, you're probably confused by two terms I just used, O5 and D-Class. The SCP Foundation is a very large organization, and like in any organization, members are usually ranked with various titles assigned to them related to their degree of importance to the organization, with the O5 Council and the D-Class being arguably some of the most iconic roles in this universe. The O5 Council are what we could briefly describe as the leaders of the SCP Foundation, a council of mysterious overseers comprised of 13 members, being likely anomalous themselves, responsible for leading the Foundation and taking various decisions related to the handling of different SCPs, basically the big dogs, with the site directors essentially the directors of each site or a major facility, reporting directly to the O5 Council. D-Class, on the other hand, are at the very opposite of this spectrum, the equivalent of a lab rat, Unwillingly recruited in 99% of the cases, D-class personnel are used in the experimentation and handling of the vast majority of SCPs, the D standing for disposable, as their lives are regarded with little to no importance by the SCP Foundation, with the D-class themselves usually being quote-unquote recruited and ethically sourced from death row prisoners. With the public believing for prisoners on death row to be executed, they are in fact most of the time sent to an SCP facility, where they will be used as subjects to be experimented upon, in an attempt to figure out what most of these anomalies do. It is unclear how exactly the SCP Foundation sources most of its D-class other than recruiting them from a roster of death row inmates, but if you have read through a variety of articles, you will sometimes see mentions of a procedure which is referred to as the D-class monthly termination, implying that most of the D-class personnel, unless being specifically required for a certain prolonged research, will only serve as lab rats for 1 month, and if still alive, executed at the end of that month. Now, this made little to no sense the first time I stumbled upon this. Why would the SCP needlessly terminate D-class members? I mean, sure, they are disposable after all, but wouldn't it be more efficient to make use of a D-class as much as possible? Manpower is, after all, a finite resource, even by the Foundation standards, especially when the manpower in question is both frequently required and frequently killed. The answer to that question is in fact a lot cooler than you would expect. There is no such thing as a monthly termination procedure, and if you're questioning as to why such a thing would even be mentioned, if untrue, that is due to another anomaly, an info hazard anomaly that affects the documentation regarding items and entities of the Foundation database, spreading or promoting the existence of this alleged monthly termination procedure, with the monthly termination being in fact just a way for this anomaly to feed on the supposed terminated D-class members. Now, if you know anything at all about creative writing, then you will assume one of two things. 1. The monthly termination, especially when mentioned so often within so many early articles of the Foundation, was in fact a foreshadowing of SCP-2193. Or number 2, SCP-2193 is an anomaly written just as a way to essentially retcon the nonsensical and illogical monthly termination procedure. I think we can safely declare the latter to be true. Item SCP-870. Object Class Dacre. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-870 is to be contained in a sealed chamber measuring 8 by 8 meters. Motion sensors are to be placed in the containment area, and movements of SCP-870 are to be monitored at all times. A motion-activated turret is to be placed directly outside the containment area to prevent the escape of SCP-870. One D-class personnel suffering from schizophrenia is to observe SCP-870 via camera at all times. SCP-870 is to be provided with one bovine carcass every 48 hours. Description: SCP-870 is an animal species of undetermined proportions and appearance, which, for unknown reasons, can only be perceived by individuals suffering from schizophrenia. This often results in specimens of SCP-870 being dismissed as hallucinations. Specimens of SCP-870 are omnivorous and seem to eat nearly all kinds of plants and meat, but will typically eat their food in secluded areas. Notably, two people with the ability to perceive SCP-870 will describe its appearance in completely different ways, even when looking at the same specimen of SCP-870. Descriptions of SCP-870 have included an alligator with spider legs and 3 eyes, a man made out of smoke, a giant ant with a human face, a hunchbacked child with a parrot's head, a spider with too many legs, a giant centipede with human arms instead of legs. Specimens of SCP-870 are highly predatory and will typically stalk their prey for months and years without eating. It is unknown how they manage to last this time without succumbing to malnutrition. Eventually, at a seemingly random time when their prey is alone or in a secluded area, SCP-870 will kill and swallow their prey whole. SCP-870's method of reproduction is currently unknown. but the Journal of Schizophrenic Researcher, Redacted, speculates that they do not actually require sustenance to survive, and instead repurpose the body of their victim into their young over a large period of time. This theory has not been verified, and research is underway to test it. The specimen of SCP-870, currently in Foundation custody, frequently attempts to breach containment and has proven hostile to all personnel. Banging noises are audible from SCP-870's containment area at all hours of the day. Research is ongoing to find a way to perceive SCP-870 without being schizophrenic, but this may take a considerable length of time. It is currently believed that there could be dozens, if not hundreds, of SCP-870 in the world. They are a clear and present danger to the public, and steps must be taken to destroy or contain the species. Addendum 8701. I personally don't believe that the schizophrenics are really seeing SCP-870 fully. They can just see it more than us. We don't see it because our brains aren't made to see it. The schizophrenics, their brains are wired up just a tiny bit differently, and they can see it just a tiny bit more. These things have the perfect camouflage, and we simply are unable to see through it. Dr. Redacted. So, where did the SCP Foundation even start from? What was the point of origin that sparked it all up? For that, we have to go back quite a while in the past, all the way to the year 2007, on the site 4chan. Back when creepypastas and made-up horror stories were at the peak of their popularity on the internet, it was inevitable for the entirety of X, the forum board of 4chan dedicated to the discussion of the paranormal, to be flooded with all kind of creepy stories. Although one post in particular had managed to gain a certain degree of notoriety within the board. A single image depicting a vaguely humanoid sculpture accompanied by the following text. Item SCP-173. Special containment procedures. Item SCP-173 is to be kept in a locked container at all times. When personnel must enter SCP-173's container, no fewer than 3 may enter at any time, and the door is to be relocked behind them. At all times, 2 persons must be looking at SCP-173 until all personnel have vacated and relocked the container. Description: moved to Site-19, 1993, little is known about item number SCP-173's origin. It is constructed from concrete and rebar and was once painted with Krylon brand spray paint. SCP-173 is animate and malevolent. If given the chance, it will kill anyone within its line of sight. Its weakness, however, is that it does not move while being watched. Despite this paralysis, it is still highly dangerous, able to cover at least 2 meters in the literal blink of an eye. It typically kills by either snapping the victim's neck from behind or grabbing the victim's throat and strangling them. Whatever animates SCP-173 does not give it much force with which to break things. As seen above, a large room with unbarred windows is fully capable of containing it. Its grip, however, is unbreakable, as when it is not moving, the statue is as hard and strong as concrete. While left alone in its room, one can hear a stone-on-stone scraping from within that is believed to be the sound of the SCP-173 moving about. The reddish-brown substance on the floor is a combination of feces and blood. We don't know, nor wish to find out, where it comes from or how it arrives, but SCP-173's container will slowly fill with these substances. In order to ensure that bacterial growth within does not begin to damage the building it is contained in, and to maintain some level of sanitation, the enclosure must be cleaned on a bi-weekly basis. This was essentially the origin, the first ever written SCP article, intended to create a fictional monster based on the picture of Untitled 2004, a sculpture made by Izumi Kato, a Japanese contemporary artist, and provided it with somewhat of a backstory. The board was, needless to say, intrigued by this. People in the replies began speculating as to what else could this statue be capable of, where could it have originated from, and what other kind of creatures the group responsible for containing SCP-173 could have locked behind doors. With the original poster of SCP-173, initially planning to make a new SCP post every week, but losing internet access for a week and a half, causing him to lose interest in doing so for over a year, a community eventually built up around the concept of creating a fictional foundation responsible for safekeeping anomalous entities and objects, causing the community to eventually move off from the X board and sort of beginning their own thing. Possibly inspired by the Weeping Angels from the TV series Doctor Who, who are essentially statues that only move when not observed, it is not hard to see why SCP-173 sparked so much curiosity and interest around it. While the idea of a murder monster capable of moving only when unobserved wasn't that original, the style in which it was written, along with the procedures required in order to safely sanitize its containment cell, were definitely an original approach, with most creepypastas and horror stories always detailing someone's events from a first-person point of view, either through written memories on a supposedly lost blog or forum post, or even through a journal. The idea of writing what was essentially a pseudo-scientific report on something that couldn't possibly exist was a welcome blow of fresh air. Obviously, the initial article of SCP-173 underwent modifications over the years, with the text being rewritten to feel more clinical and objective, by, for example, removing the part detailing that we don't know nor we wish to find out. Where the substance that appears on the floor comes from, you could compare the original SCP-173 post with the current one from 2025, and you will be able to spot quite a few differences, with perhaps the most notable one being the removal of the image of Untitled 2004 by Izumi Kato. The reason for the image's removal was pretty simple. First of all, the SCP Wiki essentially operates on a Creative Commons license, which means that creators can grant copyright permissions to the public under certain conditions, meaning that images used within the site must also adhere to that. The original SCP-173 image did not. While the original artist responsible for the creation of the piece, Izumi Kato, had given its permission for the image to be kept up on the site, the moderating team eventually came to the conclusion that it would be better if the image was removed altogether anyway, as Izumi Kato himself had and wanted no involvement with the SCP community, being initially pressured into allowing the community to use the art piece. With the iconic image's removal, SCP-173 underwent many transformations in design, with various fan arts and reimagined versions that will still adhere to the original idea, that of a statue made out of concrete, rebar, and spray painted, although a new image to serve officially as a replacement for SCP-173 was never chosen due to the author's wishes for SCP-173 to remain without an image. Nowadays, the SCP Foundation site on scpwiki.wikidot.com hosts a great variety of articles, with SCP articles themselves not only currently going up to 8,999, but also a lot of other SCP-inspired stories, with the Tales section taking an approach to more classical horror storytelling, where stories and tales of events related to the SCP universe being narrated in a less clinical, more subjective format. It is also worth noting that, despite being mainly a horror-based universe, the SCP Foundation is not incapable of humor as well, with some funny entries being related to the explained SCPs, such as SCP-1551-X, a pig with a human face grafted onto its forehead, which, after many failed testing attempts, turned out to be just a regular pig, but with the joke section also being deliberately humorous and mostly meant to be self-aware, making fun of the SCP's own absurdities, with SCP-006-J being perhaps one of my favorites. I think that perhaps one of the major factors that contributed to the SCP's Foundation's surge in popularity might have been SCP Containment Breach, a survival horror game developed by Jonas Rikkonen, a Finnish game developer that would later on proceed to create another highly popular game, Barotrauma. Entirely based on the SCP Foundation, the Containment Breach game places us in the shoes of a D-Class attempting to escape an SCP facility during a containment breach, if the title didn't give that out already, as many of the entities that were held captive within the facility have now managed to break free, with SCP-173 being the main antagonist, as the game features a blinking mechanic for the players to manage. Popularized by various Let's Players on YouTube, Containment Breach was actually very good for its time, and even today I think it holds up as a pretty solid horror game. The facility that we attempt to escape from is procedurally generated, adding a layer of replayability and unpredictability to each playthrough, and there is actually a vast collection of SCP entities scattered around for the player to interact with and avoid, each with their own behavior and mechanics, such as SCP-173, which will only move when unobserved or when the player blinks, SCP-096, whose entire mechanic revolves around being the opposite side of the coin from SCP-173, with the entity being completely harmless unless looked at, during which point it will begin aggroing towards the player, becoming an unstoppable force, always aware of the player's presence. The game also does not fall short in terms of a story with multiple endings and an actually deeply interesting lore to both the SCP universe, the reason for the containment breach taking place to begin with, and the reason for the player being a D-class. I will say that Containment Breach is perhaps one of the best SCP games around, which admittedly isn't exactly that much of a praise considering how the standard for an SCP game is generally very low, something to be expected. With the SCP Foundation operating under a Creative Commons license, with everyone being able to create essentially anything out of it, from games to merchandise and other products, paired with the SCP Foundation's popularity, it shouldn't come as a surprise that a great variety of slop games have also appeared over the years, poorly crafted, quickly developed, and meant to serve only as a quick cash grab for the unexperienced developers essentially looking to capitalize on the Foundation's success and popularity. The same applies to YouTube content, with many channels created with the goal of developing SCP-related content, only for such content to quickly become essentially slop, and more appealing to younger audiences. Seriously, do I need to explain why a video like this sounds like the most unappealing thing ever? At this point, it's just theoretical power scaling. But not every video will end up like this, with some actually being produced with a higher degree of quality and effort, with the best example I could give for this case being SCP Overlord, a 30 minutes long short film based on the SCP universe, which I will totally recommend for you to check out. I think the team behind Overlord did an amazing job with this one. If we were to talk about other things inspired by the SCP Foundation, we could very well mention Lobotomy Corporation, a 2018 horror game whose premise is built around the management of a facility dedicated to the containment and research of various anomalies, or the Anomaly DLC for RimWorld, which essentially is built around the idea of capturing and studying the diverse paranormal or anomalous entities. I think it will be a disservice to this video and the SCP Foundation's community if I didn't at least mention what is perhaps one of the best entries within the site, with SCP-173 being the highest rated entry in the SCP fandom solely due to it being the original one. I would like to present to you the second highest rated entry in the SCP Foundation, and that is SCP-2521. Creative writing most of the times revolves around the question of what? What is it that you're writing about? The subject is, without doubt, the most important thing, but sometimes people find a way to flip the script. SCP-2521 was never about the what, rather about the how. How was this entry written? Well, it wasn't, really. SCP-2521 is essentially the only article that I'm aware of on the site that was created without using a singular word. I will present the article for you on screen now. I think that this article was pretty brilliant, not because of what it chose to present, which, if you didn't get it, is essentially a monster that steals away any information regarding itself, whether written on a piece of paper, saved on a computer, or spoken by a person, but is unable to recognize information about itself if the information in question is drawn, which is why the article couldn't be written. The monster itself is but a medium, an excuse to deliver a full SCP article bearing everything that an SCP article should, starting with its containment class, containment procedures, description and testing, in a format that involves absolutely no written words, challenging everything about how SCP articles should be written and still managing to deliver something incredibly good, which brings me to my next point, quality control. I've mentioned previously in the video how the quality control of SCP articles takes place. People can submit their entries and the community gets to vote on whether those entries are viable and to become official SCP articles. It's essentially a self-quality and moderating community, with no particular person being the official judge on whether an article is good or not, rather the word of each person within the community bearing a weight in the final decision. I think of this as a double-edged sword. While the obvious good side of this is the fact that there is indeed a certain amount of quality control ensuring that badly or lazily written SCP articles don't see the light of day unless being very well written. The process to create an SCP article, submitting it and having it approved can be so cynical at times, with judgment being passed on so harshly that new writers or people unacquainted with the site itself can be somewhat discouraged in even attempting to create an entry to begin with, which is kind of ironic in a way for a project that began as what was meant to be a collaborative, community-driven writing effort to actually have somewhat of a strong level of gatekeeping to become part of. I think in this case though, the pros outweigh the cons, but I'd like to hear your opinion about this in the comments. It is also important to note how, over the years, the tone of the SCP Wiki has evolved. While perhaps not necessarily for the better, as I truly believe for some of the best SCP entries to be the early ones, with a few exceptions of course, the entire tone of the wiki has shifted from what essentially started as creepypasta-like horror to a philosophical level of fiction, with most SCP entries nowadays being meant to represent an abstract idea or being a metaphor for something else, while early SCP articles being nothing more than something spooky or anomalous being contained within a facility. The SCP Wiki has largely deviated from its original and intended purpose over the years, which is something understandable. Change is something natural after all, and there are just so many ideas that can be put into words before requiring for something new to appear in order to maintain originality. But this has brought forth an evolution in SCP articles that I would like to call the overcomplication. SCP articles nowadays, modern ones, are, or at least feel, extremely overcomplicated. While early on you wouldn't need to do anything else besides reading an entry to understand what it was about, modern articles will require for you to think, analyze, and attempt to understand what the author actually attempted to convey, an effect created by the early mentioned quality control of the site, where authors, in a desperate attempt to have their articles approved, will always attempt to create something better, shinier, and with deeper meaning than their predecessors, once again bringing us back to the double-edged sword I mentioned earlier, with the pros being that the articles can actually end up being really impressive, but with the cons being that the articles can actually end up being too overcomplicated, at times even arrogant and pretentious. Unlike previously, I believe that in this trade-off, the cons heavily outweigh the pros. SCP-4595. Containment Class Safe. Special Containment Procedures. For safety purposes, no personnel are permitted to enter SCP-4595. SCP-4595 should only be entered by authorized testing personnel under the supervision of the SCP-4595 Research Lead. Under no circumstances is SCP-4995-A to be disturbed in any way. Description: SCP-4595 is a small room in a woodshed behind an abandoned house near Jasper, Indiana. The room contains a single wooden bench and, at the time of discovery, a small shovel and the skeleton of an adolescent human male. The ground next to the skeleton appears to have been scorched at some time in the past. The exterior of the door is marked with the word "Witch" written in charcoal. SCP-4595-A is a twisted humanoid figure located 1 meter underground below SCP-4595. Ground-penetrating radar testing of the site indicates that the figure, vaguely feminine in appearance, has several large wounds to its face, chest, and neck. Despite the apparent age of the site based on circumstantial evidence, SCP-4595-A does not appear to have decomposed in the time since it was buried. Any individual who enters SCP-4595 and remains within the room will eventually begin to experience a feeling of being watched, followed shortly by an itching on the skin. Many subjects who are exposed to SCP-4595 for an extended period of time will eventually attempt to violently scratch themselves in order to alleviate the discomfort. An individual who disturbs SCP-4595-A in any way invariably experiences a phenomenon in which any empty space within their chest cavity, as well as their lungs, airways, stomach, and intestine will fill with desert locusts. These locusts will continue to spawn within the subject's body until the subject expires. Any locusts that manage to exit SCP-4595 will disappear into vapor as soon as they cross the threshold of the doorway. Every story generally tends to have a main character, a central being around which events take place, and we, the readers, are generally offered an exploration of the universe throughout which the story takes place through the eyes and the point of view of that character. Despite being a non-traditional, decentralized story, the SCP Foundation still follows a certain narrative, and the way we explore most of it, except in the great variety of tales that puts us in the shoes of other specific characters, is through the Foundation's eyes. In this case, the SCP Foundation as a whole, with its researchers, its D-Class personnel, its MTF squads, and its overseers, they can be considered the main characters of this universe, becoming so prominent in most of its narratives and articles that we can, and most people in the fandom do, refer to the SCP Foundation as a singular entity, one described as being cold, not cruel, highly efficient and always by the book, cold in its calculating nature and believing that the ends justify the means, as the Foundation is generally prepared to make any sacrifice for the greater good. This group, which was initially seen as just a vehicle for the presentation of the various anomalies, began having its own personality and unique characteristics, despite not being a singular entity. This has also given birth over the years to other quote-unquote characters within this universe to sort of populate it. These characters, like the Foundation, are in fact the representation of other groups or institutions categorized by the Foundation as GOIs or groups of interest, which are affiliated in one way or another with various anomalies and sometimes certain SCPs themselves. While a great variety of these groups are described as taking an antagonistic stance towards the Foundation itself, sometimes acting as direct adversaries with opposing goals or different ideologies as to how the anomalous world should be handled, viewing the Foundation's approach as fundamentally wrong, others are in fact responsible for the creation of a vast amount of different SCPs that the Foundation has under lock and key. A few of these groups are, for example, but not limited to, Marshall, Carter and Dark Limited, a type of club based in England focused on caring to the super rich. While they don't possess nearly the amount of manpower or expertise that the Foundation has, this group does possess a nearly unlimited amount of financial and political power, causing extensive problems to the Foundation. Known for collecting rare and obscure items, occult and anomalous in nature more often than not, Marshall, Carter and Dark Limited could be likened to what the SCP Foundation would have been if their only interest was to make money off of the anomalous world, auctioning certain anomalies off to the highest bidder while making use of the rest to provide uniquely, albeit terribly expensive, exotic experiences. The Sarkic cults, or Sarkicism, is a religious cult that encompasses a variety of traditions and beliefs centered around, in the bluntest of explanations, flesh. They manipulate it, worship it, and bend it to their will. Generally secretive and hidden from the public, certain Sarkists have achieved anomalous states of being, becoming enlightened, and transcending the physical limitations of baseline humans through organ manipulation. They believe for diseases and contagions to be blessings meant to call the weak and purify the masses, actively seeking to ensure their spread. I suppose you could technically draw a close comparison to the cult of Nurgle from Warhammer. The Chaos Insurgency, a splinter group of the Foundation created by rogue agents, are what could be described best as the Foundation's direct rivals, or their antithesis, making use of various anomalies to consolidate their power in the stage. With an unknown base of operations and mysterious leaders, the Chaos Insurgency exploits citizens of poorly developed countries as testing subjects and conscripts, similarly to how the SCP Foundation makes use of its D-class personnel, often using deadly force against the Foundation in an attempt to create containment breaches. They have also infiltrated the Foundation multiple times, causing acts of sabotage by directly freeing anomalies, pilfering valuable documentation or scientific data to serve their own purposes. Other groups of interest include the Church of the Broken God, the Children of the Scarlet King, the Global Occult Coalition, or the Mana Charitable Foundation. Of course, while the SCP Foundation does feature a few recurring name characters, such as Dr. Clef, Dr. Bright, or Dr. Wondertainment, each having their own assigned role in universe personality, goals, and stories, none of them play a role so central or pivotal as to be described as one of the main characters, although they do create a sense of familiarity when observed through a variety of different tales or documentation, further solidifying the presence or existence of this universe in which the Foundation resides in, giving them a role beyond the ones simply holding in custody and writing the articles for all of the various anomalies one reads on. I hope this was enough to illustrate the SCP Foundation's universe and give you at least a somewhat basic understanding of this project as a whole, as now I will proceed to the second part of this video, away from the SCP Foundation and into the Backrooms.
Alright, hey boss. As you can see, the people were able to clean up the place and I was able to help. Really good. That one spot that was really bad, that may be an exception. But everything else is clean. As you can see right here, I'll be moving around here a little bit to show you. And yeah, it's pretty good. But I'll go to room 1 soon. Just wanted to let you know. God dang it. What? Stupid mic. What? Hey, who turned that on?
If you had access to the internet for the last few years or so, chances are you've seen this image before. Posted in 2019 on 4chan, this image accompanied by the text, "If you're not careful and you no-clip of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the badness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." Starting off of this premise, the post already has managed to establish a few things. The first is that, in this, hopefully fictional story, humans can no-clip out of reality if they carelessly approach certain areas. For those of you unaware, no-clipping is a term used within video games to describe a function that allows players or characters to have their collisions disabled, essentially allowing them to pass through walls or solid objects and usually ending out of bounds, outside of the playable video game area. This post establishes the possibility of no-clipping in real life, and a possible external force transporting the no-clipper in question into what appears to be a parallel dimension. According to the post, this dimension will be called the Backrooms, and resemble what would essentially be perhaps a largely stretched out variation of an empty office building. No windows, no exterior, just an extremely large area. I've heard of people referring to this area as being infinitely large, but the original post clearly states that the dimension of the backrooms being about 600 million square meters, which will be around 3 times Earth's surface area in comparison. If flying around the Earth will take 42 hours or less than 2 days, then flying from one end of the backrooms to the other, in a straight line, will take practically less than a week. It will take more time to fly with a plane, if such a thing was possible, from the Earth to the Moon. This distance is essentially nothing in the grand scheme of things, especially when put up against infinity, of course. 600 million square miles hit differently without a plane. It'd take far longer to cover such a distance on foot, maybe around 3 years, if we are taking into account the hypothetical that a person will be traveling around 8 hours a day and in a straight line, but given the seemingly labyrinthine features of the backrooms, a straight line might be a bit of a challenge. The third thing that this post establishes is the existence, or the presence, of something else. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you. We are offered a completely non-descriptive information relaying the existence of something, an entity of sorts, within this alternate dimension. So a few questions already arise from this post. How exactly do you no-clip into reality? How do you translate a video game mechanic into real life that would essentially violate every known law of physics? The post mentions no-clipping in the wrong areas. What about the good areas? What happens if you no-clip there? Do you just go through solid objects? What about the backrooms themselves? What are they exactly? An alternate dimension, that's for sure, but were they built by someone? Did they simply appear like this? Where do the lights harness the electricity to function to begin with if this place is essentially practically empty? What if we were to dig downwards? What if we were to go upwards? And what kind of other entity is located here with us? The "God save you" expression surely makes it clear that this entity is malicious in nature. But is there just one or multiple? What does it look like, and what is it capable of? As you can see, the amount of questions that can arise from this post is certainly vast, and none of them will be answered without highly theoretical, speculative, and imaginative thought processes, which essentially prompted an entire community to start wondering about these so-called backrooms. The whole concept of no-clipping in itself is particularly fascinating, and perhaps not completely deranged, although still insane and possibly based on the principle of quantum tunneling. I will spare you the detailed scientific explanation around this. It wouldn't be fair to subject you to this lecture, and it wouldn't be fair for me to be the one to explain it, as I haven't completely understood it myself. I'm sure there is plenty of videos from people more qualified than me to explain exactly how this works, but this idea revolves around the theoretical and huge underline on the theoretical possibility that if you were to slam your hand on a table, your hand could theoretically pass through the table as if the table weren't a solid object, because every particle that makes up both your hand and the table will align themselves so perfectly at that very moment to allow your hand to pass through. The possibility of this happening is so small that it might be practically zero. Seriously, did you just try to slam your hand through the table? Come on, it's not gonna happen. With this, the internet had the necessary ingredients to make its recipe. A mysterious prompt that created many questions and practically no answers along an original and intriguing idea. The fandom quickly divided in two separate groups, with the first attempting to build more onto the initial idea, taking the backrooms as absolutes, speculating just what else could be found in those yellow rooms illuminated by buzzing neon lights and what kind of creatures will be stalking through its halls, while the second group expanding on the concept of being trapped in a liminal space, not giving too much regard to the original backrooms, elaborating little on them, while approaching the idea of the existence of other kind of backrooms, all built around a central theme, with perhaps the second most popular one being the pool rooms. an idea that will later on cement itself into the generally accepted canon lore of the Backrooms, that each separate liminal dimension would eventually lead to another one referred to as levels, with the first OG backroom post representing level 0, the beginning of the journey of any Backrooms level explorer. It is clear at this point that the backgrounds had become its own things, although even to the current day they will remain splintered and decentralized, with the fandom dividing itself over a variety of wikis such as Backrooms Wikidot, the Backrooms Fandom Wiki, the Liminal Archives, the Spatial Records Wikidot, and the Lost Souls Wikidot, along with many others. The Backrooms community would never reach a common consensus as to what could be considered officially canon in regards to the fandom, excepting a few elements. That the Backrooms were in fact a collection of various alternate dimensions, each referred to as level or layers, accessible one through another, that the original one was the first level, or level 0, and that these dimensions would be inhabited by all kinds of creatures. It was of course a community-driven writing project, but the community was decentralized. Anyone was allowed to come up with just any kind of idea, and their canonicity or belonging to the fandom will be decided based on the general public's reception. Backroom entries are written in a more of a personal way. While some wikis attempt to describe levels and their interiors with an objective writing format, as if an external force or organization was responsible for the exploration and documentation of these parallel dimensions, other wikis would approach a more personal, subjective writing format, with entries taking a more informal and personal writing style, resembling journal entries or lost exploration logs from long-gone wanderers. While the writing format would change depending on level and community responsible for the creation of the article, one particular element will remain as a staple: images. With every level essentially being born or inspired out of an image depicting a liminal space, something often associated with the Backrooms fandom as a whole, if not even the foundation of it, providing an image to an article would often be more of a requirement than not. And to those of you who are still not aware what a liminal space is, briefly explained, a liminal space refers to a space of transition, something that can be described as the in-between. Images depicting liminal spaces and thus being viable to become a potential backroom level will usually depict places or locations such as empty hallways or corridors, empty storage rooms, or even empty streets at night. Liminal spaces are usually locations that can evoke a sense of nostalgia or unease, either by depicting locations that you might have been perhaps familiar with as a kid, but not paid too much attention or importance as they never represented a definitive place, only a room that will grant passage to another, while their ambiguity presenting themselves as places that could be anywhere and yet nowhere at the same time. I do have a video going into more details about liminality, so feel free to check it out if you want to delve deeper into the subject. While the Backrooms would often be mocked for their lack of apparent horror and the absurdity of the concept to begin with, as essentially the entirety of the Backrooms' initial horror aspect revolved around the idea of, "Ooh, it's a place, but it's big and empty, but maybe not completely empty." I can personally see the appeal and the horror aspect of the Backrooms. They do after all play around the fear of the unknown, twisting seemingly familiar locations with the unfamiliar, adding elements of mystery to them. In a sense, part of the Backrooms horror could be described as the creation of an uncanny valley, but for locations and rooms instead of humans, if that makes sense. Perhaps uncanny familiarity is the correct combination of words to describe this. There isn't necessarily only one genre of horror that the Backrooms abide to, especially given that each different level usually revolves around a separate theme, but still adhering to the earlier concept that I mentioned of liminality. Cosmic horror is definitely a genre the Backrooms belong to. After all, this hypothetical scenario does place you in a situation where the deeper you go, the less sense things make, while being completely powerless and at the mercy of the Backrooms themselves, not as a location, but as an entity. Existential horror is perhaps another facet, since in this scenario of being lost in the backrooms, that is, questions such as, is there anything else beyond this? Is this even real? Would hold genuine ground, allowing us to categorize this as psychological horror as well. Some levels, of course, are far more specialized in their niche of horror, delving into highly specific fears or phobias, such as thalassophobia or the fear of heights. There isn't really one strict genre of horror that encompasses the entirety of the backrooms, and I think that's pretty cool actually. Because if you're not particularly surprised or shocked by one specific level, there are others that might do the trick for you. In essence, the horror of the backrooms does revolve around the idea of you asking yourself, what if I was in that situation? Level name: Boundless Retail. Difficulty: 2 out of 5. Boundless Retail is straightforward to colonize and explore, although it may be a lengthy process due to its size. Entity count: 3 out of 5. There are many entities in Boundless Retail, yet not all are hazardous with the proper preliminaries. Chaos Gradient: 1 out of 5. Glitches rarely happen, and even if they do, they usually affect the walls or the floor. Bassett Frazier Index: 2 out of 5. This level is one of the best to resupply, get rest, and then move forward to another level. If you ever need supplies or certain objects, the mall should have them if you come across them. Description: Boundless Retail resembles a neon mall from the 1980s. The mall is spread across thousands of miles. The most critical areas, named blocks, are lettered from A to Z, after which the block system will use numbers instead. Inside these secured blocks, entities have been eradicated by humans, leading to the establishment of the Entity Exclusion Zone that was inside the block system. You will find many stores spread out across the mall. These stores are littered with supplies and gear. The mall has 2 completely identical floors and houses lines of stores. The stores themselves resemble shopping centers, restaurants, and clothing stores. Each store has a minimap of the current area and where you are for easy navigation. The stores hold a variety of supplies that can help with survival and your journey through the backrooms. You can find these stores throughout the level, but it is not recommended to claim a store without confirming it is safe. Stores can contain entities and other potential dangers. Additionally, there are intersections between blocks that display sleek wooden railings and ocean blue tiling. You may also find doors labeled Staff Only while traversing the crossings. Opening these doors exits the level. You can get around the level in security buggies that you can find near any escalator. You can find elevators near the lobby areas of the mall, near the bathrooms. The elevator will most likely take you to the 2nd floor, but on occasion you can travel to the apartment or electrical station. Upon arrival, the elevator will shudder. The further you stray from the central blocks, the more the mall deteriorates in quality. This can be observed in many ways. Notable examples of such deterioration are paint chipping, shattered glass displays, and misplaced equipment. If you venture far enough, you may find yourself surrounded by foliage and run-down stores still flickering with neon light. The contents of the farther regions of Boundless Retail have never been documented. However, it is assumed that the building retains its deteriorated state throughout the rest of the level. The more recent observations of Boundless Retail have yielded results. The further blocks of the level have been observed to be covered in snow on certain days. It is unknown where the snow comes from, but it is hazardous due to the large entity group surrounding it and the below freezing temperatures inside the blocks coated in snow. Stepping away for a moment from the backrooms, or rather the written parts of the backrooms, I would like to talk about what other media the backrooms has inspired. In terms of video games, I'd say that the backrooms isn't exactly doing so well. I did actually buy into the backrooms hype back at the time and ended up playing a few of them, hoping to find one that would be good. To my surprise, I happened to find 3. Enter the Backrooms, the Classrooms, and the Backrooms Lost Tape. Enter the Backrooms was definitely decent in terms of gameplay, maybe not the most visually appealing out of the 3, but it definitely stands out for the amount of content it has. Lots of levels, lots of enemies, and lots of items to collect and use along with different mechanics and resources that one needs to manage. The classrooms you've probably heard of. I'd say it works fairly well as a horror game. While still not very visually appealing, it's definitely an upgrade when compared to the previous one, and it's still being updated fairly frequently. I'd say that in terms of content, it has less potential gameplay hours than Enter the Backrooms, but as I said, it's still being updated fairly frequently, while Enter the Backrooms received its last update in 2024, so it will probably surpass it in that field soon enough. My only issue with the classrooms is that it didn't manage to necessarily capture the feeling of the Backrooms as well as other similar games, but the enemies are pretty good, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, making them feel very unique. The Backrooms Lost Tape is perhaps my favorite one out of the three. While the gameplay is very lacking, as there is practically none, excepting a chase at the very beginning, with the rest of the game being essentially a walking simulator, it is extremely visually appealing. Graphically speaking, it's perhaps the best Backrooms game out here, and it does manage to capture the feelings of the Backrooms pretty well. The lack of enemies for the most part does give out that sense of loneliness one should get within the Backrooms, while the constant presence of man-made objects and the non-randomly generated environment is rich in detail. Not as good in terms of content, in fact it's definitely the most lacking out of the three. It won't take you more than a couple of hours to play throughout the entire game, maybe 3 if you don't rush and actually take in and observe the environment, which I totally recommend you to, but I think this game focused more on the quality over quantity aspect. These 3 are my personal recommendations in terms of backroom games. By no means I'm trying to say that the rest are bad. If you do know a few good ones, do recommend them to me in the comment section. It goes without saying though that the Backrooms do have a reputation for bad games, and honestly I cannot disagree. Steam has been littered left and right with Backrooms inspired games, and brave statement incoming, most of them are complete unfiltered garbage. They bring nothing new or original to differentiate them from their successors and are obviously made in a rush as cheap money grabs. I think it will be fair to say that the Backrooms community has reached the peak of its popularity 3 years ago, with the release of the short film The Backrooms Found Footage by Kane Pixels on YouTube, which to date is his most successful video, sitting just over 67 million views as of today, eventually turning into a small series. The Backrooms had become more popular than ever. While the gaming scene lacked in terms of iconic or representative games of the Backrooms fandom, the Backrooms inspired and prompted a large number of creators to make various kinds of lost footage type of videos, which will feature visually stunning graphics, which makes sense when you think about it. The Backrooms were never a fertile ground for games, as the idea was always inherently based around a visual experience rather than an interactive one. Level 88, Muted Lake. Survival difficulty, pending. Safety undetermined. Unsecured. Presence of entities undetermined. The Muted Lake is a level that several explorers have encountered whilst traversing other levels with dense dark forests. Research has shown that every instance of the Muted Lake is identical, but it is unknown whether 2 people are able to enter the level at once. Additionally, all instances have been documented to appear late into the night. Description: the Muted Lake is an eerily still, lifeless body of water that maintains a frigid temperature, regardless of the warmth of the surrounding level. Further reports on the lake have documented a strange metallic smell emanating from it. When within, as of yet, unknown radius of the Muted Lake, as its name indicates, all forms of vocal communication become extremely difficult. The lake acts as a black hole of sorts for it, siphoning any sort of sound into its depths. Anyone who has lingered around the Muted Lake for an extended period of time has noted an acute loss of speech, with this partial or complete mutism lasting anywhere from several hours to several months. In rare cases, individuals develop aphasia-like symptoms or reported dreams in which their own voices were used against them. If one is to submerge themselves in the water of the lake, vibrations under its surface have been described to affect the individual. In rare cases, people have noted whispers and myriad other noises to travel up their bodies, which has been ascribed to the vibrations. As one approaches the center of the lake, these whispers and ripping become louder and louder. Submerging oneself entirely in the muted lake is strongly advised against, as their ears will be flooded with a cacophony of screeches, whispers, and miscellaneous noises, all seeming to be sourced from the surrounding area. Meg notice. In accordance with the discovery of a tape found by a passerby on the lake's shoreline, depicting who appears to be a person called Agent Bennett being dragged into the lake by a black amorphous mass sprouting a mangled hand in order to further drag Agent Bennett into the depths, Level 88 has been deemed uninhabitable. Avoid at all costs. I think that an interesting aspect of the Backrooms is how this universe, or the Backrooms, initially began revolving around the idea of a complete isolation, of one being stranded into a familiar, yet unfamiliar space, with nothing but the rumor of something else, not human in nature, possibly being there. But being part of a group is human nature. Humans were never made to be lone wolves. Wolves themselves were made to be lonely, and thus it wouldn't take too long for the Backrooms fandom to slowly incorporate the idea that the people within the Backrooms are not completely isolated. After all, you can only create so many narratives with only one human character before eventually just retelling the same tale about simply wandering and losing your mind or becoming the victim of some eldritch horror. Other than hostile entities, human outposts and shelters exist, especially within the more peaceful or inhabitable levels, which slowly led to the creation of designated groups or independent factions, each with their own goals or objectives within the Backrooms. The MEG, Major Explorer Group, according to the Backrooms Wikidot, is the currently largest faction in the Backrooms, created with the goal of finding an escape. Divided into small teams and focused on various tasks such as exploring, mapping out areas, and terminating hostile entities, the MAG is run by the Overseers, a team of 3 people holding the most knowledge within and watching over the various groups. The MAG is responsible for the creation of a publicly accessible database to inform the Backrooms denizens on how to identify and deal with the various anomalies found within the Backrooms, while being positively sure about someday being able to find an exit. The Pantheon is an ancient group of godlike entities once worshipped by the Lost, an ancient group of multiple civilizations dating back to the earliest days of history who've been since forgotten by time in the Backrooms, with a sole goal unifying them all, to be remembered. The group of godlike entities forming the Pantheon was believed to be responsible for the creation of the Backrooms as a personal paradise of sort. While the Pantheon was worshipped for many ages, their reign quickly came to an end when the Iron Fist revolted against them. The Iron Fist is a group firmly believing in the freedom of man, with the sole purpose of liberating humanity from the rule of tyrannical gods, now radicalized into the extent of wanting to eradicate any and all godlike entities, believing that any being presenting itself as a so-called god is not to be trusted nor followed, as those who make claims of divinity are false idols, not to be placed on pedestals, but to be torn down. A place as godless as the Backrooms should not be home to any divine being. This, of course, is the canonical approach to the Backrooms taken by the Backrooms Wiki on Wikidot, with other wikis having their own opinions, ideas, and canons when referring to the groups existing within the Backrooms. As I've mentioned previously, the decentralization of the Backrooms fandom and the difficulty of agreement on various matters rendered the existence of universally accepted canonic elements a arduous task, excepting for a few elements such as certain entities or almond water, a recurring nourishing source of hydration commonly found within numerous levels of the Backrooms, a naturally flavored beverage with a sweet almond taste. The reason for its existence and how it became so widespread within the Backrooms remains a mystery, but its use has been reported to cure minor illnesses and completely neutralize effects inflicted by certain hostile entities. Speaking of hostile entities, I think it should be time to cover some of the most widely known ones. While certain entities have been reported to reside only within certain levels, it is important to note that the Backrooms are essentially a place that makes little to no sense, so do not expect to find any sense within its entities as well. Most of them do not fit thematically within the Backrooms or the levels they reside within, almost as if sprouting from the deranged ramblings of a lunatic. Starting with the Smilers, generally hostile creatures inhabiting the vast majority of the backroom levels, Smilers are easily identifiable by their glowing eyes, and more iconically, bright glowing teeth contorted in a grotesque smile. Maintaining eye contact with a Smiler is a method of keeping them at bay, while keeping in mind that they are attracted to light and light sources. Smilers will generally attack if you begin to panic or make a loud noise, thus maintaining eye contact and remaining calm while slowly retreating is essential behavior when dealing with one. The Windows are another hostile entity found within the Backrooms. As the name gives, they take the physical aspect of a window, with some referred to as occupied windows, featuring a dark human silhouette within them. The Windows are predatorial entities, and while they will mostly manifest on the surface of various walls, it is not unheard of Windows manifesting on floors or ceilings. It is advised for one to keep their distance from windows, never to approach them, and under no circumstance open them. Death moths are, as the name suggests, giant insect predators resembling moths. Often found within dark areas, they behave like ambush predators, lying in wait for prey to approach. Male death moths are generally as large as a hawk, relatively calm, and find themselves on the food chain as both prey and predators. Female death moths, on the other hand, are 4 times as big as their male counterparts, highly aggressive, and have no predators in the food chain of the Backrooms. Directly attracted by light, it is recommended to be cautious when venturing in death moth territory, as their predatorial ambush tactics give little to no time for wanderers to react, with any flicker of light potentially causing the death moths to immediately react. Pointing a light source in the moth's eye is a double-edged sword strategy, as it will further agitate the moth, rendering it more aggressive, but it can also possibly confuse and disorient it, giving any wanderer a chance to either attack it or flee. Clumps reside within most backroom levels and resemble a spherical, clumped-up bundle of human limbs. Extremely fast and agile, their speed is matched only by their constant hunger, as clumps appear to be constantly in search of prey. Their method of hunting involves chasing their prey and outstretching their limbs in an attempt to overwhelm and capture their victims, dragging them towards the center of their body, revealing a razor-sharp teeth-filled mouth. If you're ever wandering through the backrooms and you happen to hear a sound resembling multiple people running, then you should start running away yourself. Partygoers are generally described as tall, bipedal creatures. These entities are easily recognizable by their yellow leathery skin and a crude red smiley face carved on what could be assumed to be their head. One of the most dangerous entities generally agreed as one of the Backroom's apex predators, partygoers hunt humans for food, sport, and as a method of reproduction, as they appear capable of converting humans into other instances of partygoers. Their friendly, almost innocent appearance, just like most things in the Backrooms, is but a facade, as partygoers are generally described as relentless in their pursuit, highly intelligent when cooperating with each other and setting up traps or ambushes, and extremely sadistic in their methods. While they can be found virtually anywhere, as partygoers have demonstrated great prowess in navigating the Backrooms, partygoers are one of the few entities to have their own level of residence. Mainly referred to as level fun, this level takes different shapes and forms. From a cruise ship to an endless maze of hallways, the common element of this level are the rooms resembling children's birthday party areas featuring decorated tables, plastic utensils, party hats, and balloons. Skin stealers are another entity widespread across various levels of the Backrooms. Largely humanoid in their appearance, they can wear the skin of their victims as a disguise, hence their name. As their diet subsists mainly on human flesh, skin stealers will prey on human victims by disguising themselves using the skin of their prior victims, mimicking words or sentences they've heard from previous victims in order to lure their prey. A skin stealer's skin is covered in small bumps resembling suction cups, whose purpose is to ensure that their disguise will remain properly attached, while supplying the outer layer of skin with nutrients to prevent decomposition. While a disguised skin stealer is almost irrecognizable from a regular human, one can deduce their nature by paying attention to their speech pattern, which will be comprised mostly of a random assortment of words. While this is definitely not an extensive list of every entity found within the Backrooms, I think that it should be enough to convey an important aspect about their naming convention. Most named entities, with a few exceptions of course, are usually named after the characteristic that makes them stand out the most, be that physical or aesthetic one. It really fits into the whole narrative of the Backrooms, of people exploring these alternate dimensions and assigning simple, easy to remember and suggestive names to each entity encountered, as the simplicity of the names renders these creatures far more recognizable. After all, if you are trying to catalog possible dangers in an unknown place, it'd be more likely you will name them in the simplest way possible, as you wouldn't be doing anyone a favor by coming up with some complicated or ambiguous name. It would be pretty great if each level also followed a similar naming convention, which some do in fact, such as the abandoned utility halls, the electrical station, the abandoned office, but a lot of levels other than their number tend to have highly ambiguous names. I get that this is something intentional by the original writers, as a catchy and captivating name is usually an indicator of originality and creativity, but I think the entire atmosphere of the Backrooms will benefit more by following a format attempting to keep things as simple as possible in a universe where everything is so complicated, sort of dipping into the theme of humanity trying to make sense out of chaos and bringing order where there is none. Level 37. Sublimity. Threat Index, Class 1. Safe, unstable, devoid of entities. Description: Level 37, commonly referred to as the Poolrooms, is an expansive complex of interconnected rooms and corridors submerged in undulating, lukewarm water. Each area of the level varies greatly in size and structure, ranging from uniform pools and hallways to more open, abnormally shaped areas. The majority of surfaces in the level are composed of white ceramic tiling, with the only deviation from this color being the blue-green hue of the water. The tiles are eerily pristine in condition, all identical to one another, without a single hint of damage on their shiny surfaces. The architecture of level 37 is varied, but strict in design. All areas in the level connect to one another in a senseless manner, with none having an easily identifiable purpose. Although the intended use of each area is difficult to determine, they are much too large to properly serve the function of a pool. The abnormality of level 37's geometry negates any purported purpose it might serve. Pillars protrude out of the water in certain areas, much too large in quantity to be practical. Light is cast from irregular angles, leaving some areas completely cast in darkness, and certain staircases descend directly into deep pits of water. Entrances to these deeper areas are typically found in the form of descending staircases or direct underwater holes. It is advised to avoid exploring such areas due to their inherent danger. Without the proper equipment, one could easily drown in the level's depths due to their lack of lighting and unpredictable currents. Upon investigation, traces of magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt, have been discovered in the waters of level 37. This compound, when engulfing one's body for extended periods of time, has a natural relaxing effect, relieving muscles and alleviating bodily pains. Alongside this, traces of multiple unidentified compounds were also found present in the water. The origin and properties of these substances currently remain unknown, but due to their coexistence with the aforementioned Epsom salt, it is believed that they enhance the water's relieving effects via anomalous means. By unknown means, a minimal and constant rippling is present in all liquid surfaces within level 37, despite them being otherwise undisturbed. It is not known whether this rippling originates from a certain point in the level or if it is a property inherent in the water itself, though some wanderers theorize that the level may be so large that it has developed its own tidal forces. Sound is severely altered in level 37. Examples include the sudden dropping off of noises produced in the level, sound waves not reverberating as they should, and speech feeling muted or dampened. It is suspected that this primarily stems from the sounds of the water, which behaves in a subtly unorthodox manner. In certain explorations, the sound of the water has been described as quiet, almost calming, whilst in other cases it has been reported to be obtrusive, drowning out most other sounds. The cause of these effects is still undergoing research, but no concrete conclusion has been drawn thus far. So we've talked about the SCP Foundation, we've talked about the Backrooms, analyzed each project's elements, writing formats, origins, inspirations, and lore. Taking all we know and learned so far, it's time to actually start comparing the two, see just how different they are from each other, and what aspects actually render them so similar. Both the Backrooms and the SCP Foundation originated from 4chan. It is important to note that one of them, in this case the SCP Foundation, actually stayed on 4chan for far longer than the Backrooms did. The Backrooms, unlike the first entry for SCP-173, were pretty much exposed to the rest of the internet almost immediately. While it doesn't seem readily apparent why, this factor actually influenced much in terms of growth for both projects. The SCP Foundation, as it initially remained only on 4chan and then began slowly moving over other forums before imploding into popularity, had far more time to perfect itself. By the time it was exposed to the internet, the SCP Foundation had a universe and quite a few entries written around it, essentially giving it time to become a finished product, or one with a far stronger foundation, pun intended. The Backrooms, on the other hand, were immediately exposed to the internet, giving no time for a stable community to build around them first, essentially creating this unbalance. On one hand, this immediate exposure and sudden growth to virality did help kickstart not just the Backrooms, but the entirety of the liminal spaces trend as a whole, giving it the exposure required to become such a popular project in the first place. On the other hand, the project was still essentially undercooked. I heavily doubt that what we saw on 4chan, that original green text, could be used or presented as a finished product. It establishes nothing beyond a very simple idea, and unlike the SCP Foundation, which had already quite a few things built around it by the time it became popular, the Backrooms had nothing beyond that initial post, thus creating this fracture in the community, with each person adhering to different theories and ideas, something working as a double-edged sword, as the fractured community did allow for more ideas to surface, but at the same time prevented them from unifying in a singular place and establishing them better. So why did the SCP Foundation bloom so much later after its origins when compared to the Backrooms? This phenomenon is actually quite simple to explain. There wasn't much to the SCP Foundation to begin with, nothing to build upon. The initial idea presented nothing more than the existence of an anomalous being held captive. People did begin speculating on the entity's origins, theories on how it came to be or why it functioned the way it did, but the most important aspects, those being what the creature looked like, what it could do, and how to combat it, were already established. There wasn't much to build upon here other than creating new creatures, new monsters, or new SCPs. Something that could be done and was already being done much independently from the SCP Foundation under different formats, different medias, different stories. The Backrooms, on the other hand, presented nothing. A picture of a liminal space, an ambiguous description regarding how to access it, and a small hinting towards the existence of something inhabiting them. That's it. The original idea was simple, yet captivating, and with so little being known about it, with so many interesting questions being left unanswered, the internet had to provide. After all, the existence of the Backrooms, of an alternate dimension comprised of man-made resembling structures, or better said, interiors, was something completely original with its own identity. The initial SCP post, on the other hand, was anything but that. The existence of a monster moving only when out of sight, along with the existence of a secret organization dedicated to capturing and dealing with anomalies, was already a cliché at that point, which explains why it didn't capture the interest of the internet so much right off the bat. In the end, the popularity of the two projects could be compared to two fires. The SCP Foundation, a fire that began burning as fuel was being slowly but steadily added to it, ensuring a progressive growth. And the other one, the Backrooms, a fire that was built quickly, overloaded with fuel, for its flame to burst out of nowhere very brightly, only for the fire to spread around chaotically and its flames to burn down quickly, now only dimming in a dispersed field. This brings us to something I've already mentioned. One of the main differences between the SCP Foundation and the Backrooms is the clear difference in centralization. While the SCP Foundation essentially centralized itself in only one forum, one site, one community deciding what could be considered canon, what was acceptable and what was not acceptable, gathering every member of its fandom in one singular place, the Backrooms are completely decentralized, with no officially canon elements existing. its community widespread across a multitude of sites and wikis, each harboring their own headcanons, theories, and opinions, giving the Backrooms an identity far more shattered, splittered, and vague when compared to that of the SCP Foundation, as ideas, theories, entities, their behavior, or even entire levels might be completely different for one community to another, while still essentially building upon and representing the same name or universe. I've previously mentioned the advantages and disadvantages of this, but it does create a clear difference in lore organization, where the SCPs tend to be highly structured while the Backrooms appear to be chaotic with different canons contradicting each other, essentially taking into this aspect of no single official narrative existing, rather leaving everything up to personal interpretation. Next, let's talk about what each fandom managed to inspire. The SCP Foundation in terms of video games did produce far better results than the Backrooms did. It's not that the Backrooms produced only garbage games, as I stated previously, despite the immense amount of pure slop being recycled and vomited over and over, a few gems did manage to surface from the mud, but unlike the SCP Foundation, it never managed to produce something as iconic as SCP Containment Breach. When you think about the Backrooms video games, chances are each and every one of you might think of something different, but when you think about an SCP video game, Containment Breach is probably going to be your first thought. If not, Secret Laboratory will be, and even that is, let's be honest here, essentially just a multiplayer mod for Containment Breach. Both became highly iconic and representative games of the fandom and project as a whole, something that no Backrooms game ever managed to achieve. On the other hand, the Backrooms did manage to gain the upper hand on something the SCP Foundation found itself lacking at times, and that's its visual media. While the SCP fandom did better in terms of video games or narrative experiences, the Backrooms fandom found its success within a variety of animations, lost footage type of videos, and visual representations of various Backrooms levels. Now, the most important comparison between the SCP Foundation and Backrooms is their writing style and format of information exposure, along with how each of the two approach their respective universe. The SCP Foundation's format essentially revolves mainly around clinical, objective, scientific documents and research papers, accompanied by precise instructions. The Backrooms, on the other hand, despite emulating what the Foundation did, attempting to write their universe under an informational format managed by a specific group, still retains a somewhat informal and subjective writing style, with each article essentially documenting what appears to be personal experiences and personal feelings. In no way I'm trying to say that one writing format is better than the other, but the difference is there. But while the writing styles are perhaps in a stark contrast with each other, I will say that they share a few similarities in terms of horror, similarities in terms of theme, but differences in how they approach them. There is also a resemblance between the SCP Foundation and the Backrooms in the way that their stories are told with the lacking of a central character or protagonist. The protagonist is essentially just the people inhabiting that universe. There is no singular person upon which the story focuses on constantly. It's always either a group or a faction, and while exploration logs from the Backrooms are usually recounted in first person in a subjective manner, different levels always take the point of view of different people. There isn't a singular person exploring all of them, rather a multitude, which it makes perfect sense. Baseline humans are fragile, and there is no singular human that could be expected to realistically survive throughout every ordeal presented in either of the two universes. Both the SCP Foundation and the Backrooms make use of a narrative horror that isn't outright shocking, but does attempt to evoke discomfort through uncanny familiarity. The Backrooms attempt to evoke this familiarity through places or locations, while the SCP Foundation attempts to evoke it through their scientific approach to something that cannot be explained by science, or by rendering day-to-day objects, locations, animals, or situations anomalous. Essentially, both have the same approach of attempting to distort and corrupt something that should be normal at first, only to add a twist, rendering it completely different from what we might be used to. But the difference between the two worlds is how the people, the humans inhabiting them, approach these worlds, with the humans in the SCP universe being put into this role of researchers, jailers even, attempting to contain and secure anomalies, studying them and attempting to understand what makes them tick, while being faced with constant ethical dilemmas, and the age-old question of whether the means justify the ends, giving the SCP universe this theme of the humans inhabiting it and being part of its narrative having this higher purpose, while the Backrooms places the humans in a role of someone who is trapped and merely trying to survive what appears to be a chaotic and nonsensical dimension. They are not trying to understand it or defeat it, merely attempting to make the best out of a bad situation in the hopes of eventually escaping this predicament. The core difference between the two is that the SCP Foundation acts on the world. The Backrooms, meanwhile, it's the world acting on you. That's the thematic difference between the two. In conclusion, I think this should illustrate well enough the similarities between these two projects and the elements that make one distinguishable from another. I would like to say that this video shouldn't be taken as a sort of contest between the two. My goal was never to prove that one is better than the other, if such a thing is even possible. It's a conclusion that you will reach on your own, although I will be curious to see your opinions of that in the comment section. As always, I like to thank this channel's members for their continued support. I know I haven't been uploading as frequently as in the past lately. I've been finding a great enjoyment working on long essays like this one rather than short videos, but I will be attempting to find a sort of balance between the two, as I know long format videos like this aren't exactly appealing to everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It's a great way to support me and my content and help promote my videos in the algorithm. As always, I hope you have a good night and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.